Have you ever heard of the Danish Way of Parenting?
I actually just devoured an amazing book by that title.
That's so funny that I asked you that question.
I know. Hey, let's talk about it on today's podcast.
Hey, that's fun.
Mama says namaste. Mama says namaste.
Making a family can be easy and fun.
Oh yeah, but raising a family can be a whole different story.
From spouses to kids to the crazy daily grind, life often directs us away from connection and more into reactive chaos.
If you're tired of that cycle and are seeking something beyond the picket fence blues, this is the show for you.
I'm Ashley.
And I'm Nathan.
And we're here to take you from chaos to clarity by bringing awareness and intention into your home, not waiting for one day, and highlighting how
the uniqueness in each of us strengthens all of us.
Take a deep breath in and let's start a brand new day. With Mama says namaste.
So last year, as I looked at all of those goals and intentions, and as we talked about all of that in last week's episode, I was on a mission to read more. And so
I haven't read more.
Do what?
Is it good? What's that by? Oh, sorry.
Funny. All right. So I was on a mission to read more. And we kind of took it as a family challenge. All of us read way more last year simply by not setting a number on the number of books that we wanted to read, but setting a time aside in order to do it.
Yeah, that was kind of your book mud flap. I just read everything after you were done with it, and then we talked about it.
There are quite a few that you did do like that. Yeah, and so one of them was The Danish Way of Parenting. I read about this a long time ago in an article, some parenting article, and I read it, and it was referenced in the article, and I thought that looks like a book I want to explore more, and so I added it to my Amazon wish list and didn't think anything about it. And then a few weeks later, my mom shows up at my house with the book, and she says, "Hey, I love you." And I said, wow, had no idea you had any idea I wanted that book. Apparently she got notified about it. And second off, thank you. So I am so grateful that she got me the book, because not only have I absolutely loved it, it's something that we've already bought many copies of to share with friends and as encouragement for ways to have fun with parenting.
Yeah. I mean, I love the book because it kind of affirmed some things and challenged some things too. That, I think that we do in our culture as a whole, but there's a lot of habits that are just like standard habits that I had never really thought about. And it's cool to see a different perspective of parenting, because you're in this microcosm of, how parenting is done just here in the United States.
Right. And I mean, we have to face the fact that the United States has definitely a different culture than other countries. Every country has its own culture. And then you get into, even just different areas in there and different demographics, and you have different subcultures within cultures. And so we all have these different approaches. And I know, yes, here in the U.S., there is a lot of push for individuality and, go, 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 do, and be individual. Those tend to be a lot of the big mantras here. And so, yeah, we were drawn to, what is this? So the Danish people have been ranked number 1 or 2 in happiness since they've been ranking happiest countries. So for 40 years, they held the number 1 place. And I just did my research before this, and I saw Finland's held it for the past 5 years.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but Denmark is the second. So it's still up there. So they have been consistently happy. Now, again, we're going to talk in broad generalizations, because we're talking about the Danish way as if the Danish people all thought exactly the same. We know that's not the truth. We know there are discrepancies, and there are people that are not parenting the Danish way that are Denmark, or that are Danish and that are not doing it. But
there's an attitude towards parenting.
Yes, there's an attitude that is different. So this book was written by an American mom, Jessica Joelle Alexander, and she claimed she didn't have a maternal bone in her body. And she married a Danish man and became friends with a Danish psychotherapist named Iben Dissing Sandal. And so Iben and Jessica got together and decided to figure out, what is this magic formula of parenting that works in Denmark. There weren't any books on Danish parenting styles or anything, so they were trying to encompass what are the standards that kind of tend to be those common themes. And so they were looking at really the Danish way looks at children needing space and trust to allow them to learn their own self-mastery. So they're really looking at how they can cultivate in their children how to think critically and solve their own problems. I mean, that's incredibly important. And as she writes in the book, it creates genuine self-esteem and self-reliance because it comes from the child's own internal cheerleader and not from someone else.
And that is huge.
Yes.
I mean, that is where you have a child that can look at a situation, help themselves navigate, not just crumble and, run away. They see the other side or the options. And that's, to me with parenting, the roots and the wings are such an important piece because you want to give them that foundation to be able to problem solve all the challenges that are going to come.
Right.
And this does a great job of laying that out.
Right. And so it was a great affirmation for us on what we've already believed in for parenting and family. So we felt like it encompassed a lot of what we have not striven and not strove.
We've driven.
We've been driven to do. I'm just not even going to use that word.
There you go. We'll use our word of the year.
There we go. Our word of the year, drive. There we go. First time we're implementing it into another podcast.
Like how I threaded that in.
Beautiful.
What I love about this book, though, is she gives you a great acronym, so it's super easy to remember all the little bits of knowledge that will come up throughout the day, the situations.
Right. So, so what you were talking about earlier with the roots and wings, I mean, that's the standard that we've had as our mantra from the beginning. It was in my house growing up. My mother actually embroidered it in the year I was born, embroidered this little saying. It stayed on our wall all the way until I had my own children, and then she passed it on to me, and it stays in our home. And it says there are two lasting gifts we can give our children. One is roots, the other wings. And it is such a great foundation for what all we're going to go into here, because the Danish way is very much about establishing some beautiful foundational roots of togetherness and teamwork, while also pushing very much for allowing the independence that will ultimately allow them to fly.
Absolutely. So let's jump in.
So the acronym is parent.
I didn't see that coming.
So let's break it down. Number 1, or the first letter, P, is for play.
This is my favorite letter.
I know it is. Why don't you talk a little bit about play here?
Well, play is something that we don't always allow ourselves to do as parents. We kind of have the role of enforcer, and we'll occasionally play a game or, let our hair down here and there. But we usually, it's hard to find a parent to jump into a game of tag. They're out there, and they'll do it. And I'm one of those.
And I begrudgingly am one of those.
Yeah.
And what I want to say to that is play looks different for different people, for sure. And some people, like a certain co-host here,
The giant child.
you get just as lost in play as they do. And it's such a great opportunity for you to bring back that inner child in yourself and run around and be wild and crazy and roughhouse and get out of that physical aggression and energy in a positive way. And there are all of those ways you love it.
You don't need to do that?
No. It's not my natural thing. Even as a child, I would read and I would have philosophical discussions. I didn't do as much.
We would have gotten along so well.
I would play, but my play was like playing house, like I'm playing adult. And so I didn't get into play in the same way. And
I played like drama and like theater. We were struggling pioneers in the woods. Let's go.
Right. But
those are things that are really important because, what they do is they allow your child to experiment with portions of themselves that they really don't get to play with in life.
Right. I mean, allowing our kids to lead the way in the type of play that they get lit up in not only helps them to navigate it, it helps us to get insight into the way their brain is already thinking, not just responding or reacting to us, but guided by them in their sweetest moments of delight. What are they choosing to do? What are they choosing to focus on?
Well, and it's not always sweet, Sometimes it's, play can have many different
mass chaos.
Well, I mean, there can be dramas, like on the playground that the struggle, but it's all vital. We see animals play for survival, and for me, playing is really emotional survival for humans. It gives them a chance
Ooh.
to experiment with portions of themselves at a young age that they don't really get to do, or that, that there's repercussions for as an adult. And so it's a great time to flush out, kind of who you want to be and how you want to approach.
I'm still in awe that play is emotional survival for humans.
There you go.
That is so true. And it's emotional survival for a lot of animals too. Like exactly what you're saying. Yeah. I mean, our kids are learning how to navigate fear, conflict, cooperation. They're testing themselves and their limits, both with themselves and with others.
And sometimes they just need the permission to do it.
Yeah.
They need somebody to, you might have a kid that's just sitting there on this playground reading a book quietly or just waxing philosophical with the adults. And you go over there and you grab that little girl and you say, come on, be the princess. Let's play.
Yeah.
And you see what happens. And then that's it. It doesn't have to be anything big. It's just play.
And I challenge you, just like I have had to challenge myself, to jump into their world some. Yeah, I'm never going to be the first one to recommend playing tag, but I can count numerous times I'm really grateful I did.
And you'll be thankful for the workout you received.
And I'm really proud of myself for the endorphin rush of the workout and high energy that I get afterward. Yeah, so it's worth it to me to do it. So I'll do no thank you bites of the play that my child enjoys. So it may be, building Legos, playing house, playing tag or whatever. But it takes you into their world, into their perspective, and helps you see their interests. And then expand the play to things that you can introduce them to as well. It may be that you take them into other forms of play. We were talking about taking our kids to go do bowling or laser tag.
Yeah.
Some things that they just haven't experienced. And, maybe it's us taking kids and going and doing something, going and doing a fun event, or it's baking or doing art or crafts or something, and just not having the agenda of anything but just hanging and being together and enjoying each other.
I think that's the magic, because there's nothing else going on.
Yeah.
No other noise, but.
Right. Play is not equal to your cell phones. Yes, I understand for some families, play can be connecting on video games. And if that is your jam, that can be your jam. It's not ours. That's okay. But use the play that is definitely going to allow for engagement, not just silence. So if video games are interactive and engaging, you're still having conversations next to each other,
Perfect.
Go for it. Okay, A. A is for authenticity. Being authentic can be tough. We want to protect our kids. And so sometimes we want to protect our children from the sadness or the tragedy in the world. And that was really eye-opening to me, just even reading about just kind of the history of fairy tales, for example, and how many fairy tales are tragic.
Right.
I mean, Hans Christian Andersen, he wrote, things like The Ugly Duckling, Little Mermaid, oh shoot, what was the other one they used as an example? I forgot what it was. But anyway, he's written all of these movies, and we know them with these happy Disney endings. But the reality is...
They wouldn't Americanize it, would they?
Yeah.
He lied to us?
They did. Yeah. The real stories are oftentimes much more tragic, and they don't always end in happiness. And the prince and the princess don't always fall in love and live happily ever after. And people die, and things are gory, and it's not always a pretty picture. And we will screen and filter out a lot of that sadness and suffering. But in the Danish philosophy of authenticity, they believe that these stories and entertainment allow us to come to our own conclusions and judgments. So tragedies and upsetting events are things that we need to talk about. And so watching those, being privy to those, witnessing those as with our children, are experiencing not just the happiness of life, but the tragedy of life is part of our responsibility for being authentic and showing up with each other.
But our kids won't deal with tragedy and stuff like that.
I wish that were a reality in
Right.
some ways, but you know what? Actually, I say that and I don't. I don't, because I know the other side of that. With great suffering comes great opportunity for appreciation that you never would have had without the suffering you've experienced.
Yeah. Well, I think there's some power in pain, and there's also some control. I mean, pain can be a double-edged sword. But that's the important thing, is to talk about the processing of these feelings and these things that are going on, so that kids aren't left to either assume that everything is just blindly okay, or, there's a conversation around, well, here's kind of how it makes me feel. I totally understand. Here's how it made me feel, and I can relate to that.
Right.
Those tough conversations are what allows us to move through life and not be knocked to our knees when something happens in our life that we weren't prepared for.
Yeah.
Like death, death is one of those things that was like, it never really was discussed or talked about in my family until it happened.
Mm-hmm.
And then we dealt with it.
Mm-hmm.
But it wasn't graceful, and it wasn't thought out or prepared or planned. It was just, I guess that's what it's going to look like. And I love the preparation, the conversation.
Yeah.
Death happens, and thinking about that.
And boy,
is something
watching
that you need to consider.
Yeah, watching a bridge to Terabithia together with your
Right.
family, while it completely and thoroughly infuriated our youngest at the unfairness of it all. How much better for us to have the discussions with her around death and it not being fair by watching a movie versus it having to happen first time with the slap of real life. I mean, there are opportunities where, and again, I am not advocating for watching, gory, horrific things in your entertainment. We choose entertainment that, for the most part, it's very inspiring and uplifting.
Well, there's some great card games that have questions that is a great way to open that door to those conversations of authenticity, of what do you do if somebody is making you feel uncomfortable and you don't know where your parents are. Those are conversations that are important to have, that you don't want to have post the experience.
Right. And I have a great interview, and I need to go back in and link to this one in the blog post that goes along with this week's episode. I have a great interview with Tara Miko from Bright Littles, and she has created amazing conversation cards for very young kids to discuss difficult topics. I mean, like the reality of our kids having to, experience and practice lockdowns in their schools. I mean, we can't avoid and act like guns are not a part of our 5-year-olds' lives. If your children are going to a public school, they are most likely navigating the ups and downs of gun safety and how their school is going to be prepared for that.
Well, yeah, it's not just that. I mean, you could be in a grocery store and you have to understand that there are guns in there with you.
Right. So being authentic and honest about the things that are going on, the reality of our life around us, is really important. Getting honest with our emotions is really important. For Danes, and this is from the book, they say, for Danes, authenticity begins with an understanding of our own emotions. If we teach our children to recognize and accept their authentic feelings, good or bad, and act in a way that's consistent with their values, the challenges and rough patches in life won't topple them. They'll know they've acted in accordance with what feels right. They will know how to recognize their own limits and respect them. This inner compass, an authentic self-esteem based on values, becomes the most powerful guiding force in one's life, largely resistant to external pressures. They look at not only being real with emotions and identifying emotions, but also really looking at the growth mindset. When they praise their kids, they're not praising their kid by saying, "Oh, Nathan, you are such an amazing person. You're so smart. You're the best soccer player out there."
I know.
It's, you really worked hard in soccer practice and it shows. And you really got that kick perfect. It's praising the task around, or the actions of someone. The work
towards the task.
The work, it's the task, it's the actions, it's the behavior that happens, not necessarily the person. I mean, we don't want to, if we're lavishing praise for our kids being, the smart kid, then you've got that hesitation of, oh man, shoot, I did something dumb. I'm no longer the smart kid. We all do dumb things. It doesn't make us a dumb person. It makes us, we've done something silly or something that wasn't helpful. So reframing the way that we talk to our children with this reality check of, we can be positive, but let's be real with what's going on. Focus on the tasks, qualities, and the reality of life. So look for the silver linings, but don't deny those harder sides. And that goes into the next one, R, which is for reframing.
I love this one. Because this is what I needed in my life when I was a teenager, was reframing. Because I could look at things and, oh, it's so negative. Oh, look at that. Picking apart the negative is so simple and so easy. And it's what we do. And it became the foundation of most of my relationships and conversations. Oh, the weather sucks. This sucks. Rah, rah, rah. And then I met you little positive devil.
I like to call it a realistic optimist.
There you go. A realistic optimist. Mm-hmm. I like that about the Danes, is they kind of look at it from another side and like, well, there's no bad weather, just poor choices of clothes.
I love that.
Gotcha.
Yes. Yeah. And so, straight from the book, it says, Danes don't pretend that negativity doesn't exist. They just point out in a rather matter-of-fact way that another side also exists that you may never have even considered thinking about. They choose to focus on the good in people instead of the bad. They change their expectations to focus on the bigger picture rather than getting trapped by one aspect of an argument. And they generally tend to be more tempered in their assumptions. Danes are what psychologists call realistic optimists.
Boom. There you go. That was your magic word, realistic optimist.
Yeah, I love it. Again, from the book, it says, to be a realistic optimist, you acknowledge reality, but you can still eliminate the unnecessary negative words and focus on the good feelings rather than the bad through humor or focus on another time of feeling good. If you choose to look at the positive aspects of any child's behavior, you're giving them the tools to deal with their uniqueness. It's all in the way you frame it.
That's funny because I was reading about what the Buddha taught. It's one of the books I'm reading right now. And that was one of the explanations for Buddhism, because it can kind of come across as pessimistic. We're like, no, we're not pessimistic. We're just very realistic. This is the reality. The present moment is the present moment. How we respond to that, either negatively or positively, determines our involvement. Mm-hmm. It's pretty. I mean, to give your kids that kind of awareness and understanding that, this is tough, but there's also something on the other side that is good. Or, one of the things that we've always done while we've been on the road is if something bad has happened, we've counted our blessings that, well, this didn't happen. Thank God it happened here.
Right, at least
and this is so perfect that we dropped right in this location, or we'll figure this out in this time. And so, that kind of, this isn't just oh my gosh, this is an opportunity for a solution. That kind of mindset, very valuable.
Yep. Yeah. So we want to be realistic about it, and we want to be careful about the labels that we say, because, and I mean, I have to be careful of doing this myself, where I might, I had to be really careful about not pitting Clara as the artist of the family, because the reality is all three of them do art. And when I started to see Ellie struggle and not push for her own skills because she saw that was her sister's category, I started paying attention to, okay, am I pigeonholing them? Am I categorizing them? And pulling back, now all three of them have been really developing their art. And so be careful about saying, my child's the picky eater or the introverted one or has ADHD or whatever other label. Be careful about that being the identifier. Yes, that could be a component of who they are, but it's one behavior aspect. It's one aspect of who they are. It doesn't necessarily need to become who their identity is. So think of how you're framing their life for success versus framing them to be trapped in this prison of labels that they've already created an identity around. All right, next up is E for empathy. And at the edition of the book that we read was written in 2016. I know they have newer editions because the book I keep buying for everybody else is a newer edition now. At that point, though, they had shared that a recent study had shown that empathy had dropped almost 50% in young people in the U.S. since the 80s and 90s, and narcissism had increased twofold. Obviously, we have heard a lot about narcissism in our day and age right now. All we have to do is look in politics, and we can see lots of wonderful examples and frustration there.
Be empathetic.
Right. So we want to look at what empathy is, though. And Daniel Siegel was quoted in the book, and he says, empathy is not a luxury for human beings. It's a necessity. We survive not because we have claws and not because we have big fangs. We survive because we can connect and collaborate.
Remember that. I mean, that's the most important. I mean, that shocked me when I read that. How do we survive, even in the wild? Not with claws or fangs, but with each other. And And that just helps you remember that everybody around you is part of this experience.
And I have on the blog that goes along with this, I share in there our favorite video on empathy. I share it a lot. It's just a very short clip, a cartoon clip from Brene Brown on empathy. And I highly recommend watching it. Watch it with your whole family on just understanding what empathy is. Empathy is not, well, at least it's not this. Empathy is not fixing the issue. Empathy is being there with that person and finding that deep connection of where you can, from your own perspective, start to understand where they are at. And it's such a powerful connector for people. Some of the ways that they have done it in Danish schools, they've implemented things like the step-by-step program, where children talk about empathy, problem solving, self-control, and how to read facial expressions. They have the KIT program, which is focused on emotional awareness and empathy, with looking at how to articulate experiences, thoughts, feelings, and senses. They have a Free of Bullying program that promotes spaces for children ages 3 to 8 to talk about bullying and teasing and what they can do to prevent it. And they've seen a huge decrease in bullying since they've done that, and highly recommend it. And even as teachers are getting to know their students, they will start to identify kind of strengths and weaknesses in each and start to pair them and position them together so that they can play off of each other. To help each other, so that you may have that child who really struggles in math but is a great soccer player paired up with somebody who is great at math and challenged athletically. And all of a sudden they have an opportunity to work together and help each other in their strengths and weaknesses, which, hello, that's our whole tagline.
There you go.
The uniqueness in each of us strengthens all of us. Wait, we're not done. Right. So start talking about and focusing on what are those good things in others. The more we can identify it in others and in ourselves, the more we are going to notice it. So instead of focusing in on those qualities you don't like, pull that empathy card. Those frustrations with other people, think about they might be really going through a hard time. Or I remember really, biting back when I was feeling insecure as well. I mean, there is a deeper meaning to where they're at. I've really understood empathy as I have seen as my children have, I've got a child with the same personality style as I do, and she can get super frustrated and start attacking. And it's from my own understanding of her feeling inadequate that I can go, hey, you're really frustrated with yourself right now, aren't you? And I can sit down, we can have a conversation about where she's feeling frustrated that has nothing to do with everyone she's attacking. Just being able to empathize and to connect is just a great leveling for the playing field.
Absolutely. This next one was a wake-up call for me. N is for no ultimatums. And it's just a great reminder that you don't hold things over your kids' heads and say, if you don't do this, then I'm going to do this. It's kind of, it's easy to fall into, and it's easy for, you're in that little battle of the wills. All right, well, if you don't get in the car, then we're not going to eat for a week. But it's really not worth it.
Yeah. Yeah. They shared in there how, and I actually, because the book was written a while back, I had to go and double check. And it's still legit today. There are 19 states in our country that still allow for corporal punishment in schools. So spanking in schools. My brother knows a lot about that because he got sent to the principal's office a lot as a kid in the 80s. And there was a study that was done by the Canadian Medical Association Journal, and it covered 2 decades worth of research on the long-term effects of physical punishment on children. And there was not a single study in any of it that showed anything positive. Not only did it prove that it did not work, it also showed how it could wreak havoc on long-term development. So now I'm a kid who was spanked. You were a kid who was spanked. Doesn't necessarily mean we can't survive.
I haven't developed and I'm a big kid.
No, I understand spanking is still prevalent. There are still a lot of people that spank, and I believed this myself for a while.
For me, it's kind of like hazing. when I was in a fraternity, that was trying to eliminate hazing, and they knew that if you could eliminate it for 2 semesters where it wasn't really discussed, then the general mindset or the we've always done it this way goes away. And so it's just choosing to make that switch in your life to, well, I'm not going to do that anymore. It didn't work for me, and try something new. And it's not until then that anything changes.
Yeah. And I love how, in the spirit of reframing, the Danes look at things a little bit differently. So, for example, the terrible 2s, instead of it being the terrible 2s and the threatening 3s, they call those the boundary ages, where they're brushing up against those boundaries and they're learning about what's okay and what isn't, which is so much in line with what I've talked about on the podcast before about a bathtub of boundaries with an ocean of love. Helping our kids understand boundaries does not have to happen through threats and ultimatums. It can be helping them by navigating the natural consequences, letting them fall, letting them figure it out. As much as we want to always be there to support and love our children are not going to learn how to walk if they don't understand the feeling of the fall. And so those are sometimes ways that we can navigate it. We look at, why do we have an ultimatum? And is the ultimatum really helping our children? Or are we saying it out of exasperation? Is it a threat because we're frustrated?
We're just looking for a quick alley to happy land.
Right. So start thinking about, is this an opportunity for growth or learning the hard way for your child? Or is this a time when you need to step back and ask, okay, what's so bad about it? Is this really that big of a deal? And they have, there are a ton of tips at the end of every single one of the chapters in the Danish Way of Parenting book that really helps you with some applicable step-by-step process that you can do. So for ultimatums, I went ahead and I listed them on the blog because I felt like those ones are so valuable for people to navigate, because this can be oftentimes where when we're maxed out, stressed out, this is where we're adding those threats in there. So remember to distinguish the behavior from the child. Avoid power struggles. Don't blame the child. Try to see the child as inherently good and look at it from that perspective. When you do that and you teach your children and reframe, it may be that you see how this is a developmental milestone, a learning process for them of something they've not actually figured out on their own before. Remember, the cycle comes back to you. Get your partner involved so you're not alone on this. Check your ultimatums. You may be saying some of them because they were said to you as a child. How can you reframe them in a more positive light? Think of your child's age. Be accepting of all kinds of feelings. Remember, protest is a response to something. Put the bad behavior in context. Know what makes you snap and show that you listen. Now, they go into a lot of detail onto how to navigate all of this, but wow, just checking ourselves on that and looking at our children as these developing minds and new synapses and understandings and concepts coming in, we can start to, instead of seeing our children as something to be fixed or corralled or, molded a certain way, it's more of, let's discover, what new pathways are firing now? Okay, how can we channel those pathways and use these tools for a more positive experience for you moving forward? We've got some new things to address here.
There you go. And that's just having those discussions of new stuff. Trying on some new ideas is always exciting.
Mm-hmm. And then the last one for parent is T. And T is for togetherness or hygge. And hygge is spelled Hygge. And I would have had no idea how to pronounce it, but it tells you how in the book. Thank you. So hygge. This is a little bit about what that is. The word hygge dates back to the 19th century and is derived from the Germanic word hygge, which means to think or feel satisfied. It is a virtue, a point of pride, and a mood or state of mind. Hygge is something Danes identify with both in action and in being. It is a part of their cultural foundation. Because Danes see hygge as a way of life, they all try to make a cozy time together with their family and friends happen. Feeling connected to others gives meaning and purpose in our lives.
And it's just a great we kind of do this in our own way with reading hour and then, wrapping up at the end of the day. And
That's what got me so excited about reading about it. I'm like, oh, we created it and we didn't really know the word that we were doing. But
Yeah.
I love it even more now that I can kind of put a word around it.
hygge.
I can hygge it.
there you go. And it's so important. Like a lot of times our lives get really, 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 really busy. And trying to carve some time out where you can all just hang out where it doesn't involve the television is pretty cool.
Mm-hmm.
And, I would encourage you just to try that. It can be absolutely life-changing to wake up in the morning and part of your process is everybody gets up, has a little nibble, and eases into the morning with a book together. Or even playing a game together or visiting together. But it just changes the whole energy of the day.
I've found it has been really interesting to create times where we don't talk, but we're just together. And so the reading together has created a different experience in our house of more comfort of us just being side by side with each other.
Mm-hmm.
I've really appreciated that. So a little more on what they say even in the book is hygge is a feeling as well as a way of being. It's eliminating the confusion and hysteria of all else. It's choosing to enjoy the most important, meaningful moments of our lives, those with our children and family and friends, and respecting them as important. It's keeping them simple, making the atmosphere positive, and leaving our troubles behind. It's wanting to be there in those moments, choosing to be there. And this takes effort because, like all team projects, it's working together toward a shared goal. This is the opposite of being an individual and standing out from the crowd. Everyone has to want it and respect it. Everyone plays a part. If we are all willing to contribute to creating a cozy time together, it dramatically improves family get-togethers, which in turn dramatically affects our well-being and happiness. And one of the quotes that really stood out in the book was where they said, when you substitute we for I, even illness becomes wellness. Now, again, I'm not talking about every aspect of our lives being toxic positivity and we only embrace the good stuff. We've just gone through all of these where we're talking about being authentic and being real about the way things are. Yet hygge is a time where you intentionally don't go there with conversations that are going to take you down a path of negativity or conflict. You have the common goal of togetherness. What an amazing way to choose to connect, to say, I love you. I practice being kind rather than being right. I love you so much. I'm willing to put aside every aspect of frustrations or nitpicky disagreements right now and just simply be in your presence and be with you.
You promise?
Yes.
No. I mean, that's the secret is it's not a confrontation time. It's not a time to work through challenges or, frustrations. It's a time to just be.
Mm-hmm. That's right. So, again, our acronym here, or the acronym from the book, is PARENT. P is for play. A is for authenticity. R is for reframing. E is for empathy. N is for no ultimatums. And T is for togetherness, or hygge. So where do you, as a family, feel like you are rocking it? Where do you feel like you're experiencing a bit of tension? What can you do for your family this week to address one of these areas and determine a different approach? If you have been going down this path and you're hitting frustration after frustration, maybe it's time to change your course. Maybe it's time to reevaluate and to look for another approach. Maybe it's a time to add in a hygge moment in your house.
There you go.
Daily, weekly. So we clearly loved this book. And we appreciated all of the insights that kind of reinforced a lot of what we believe and helped us to see any holes that we might have in our own parenting. So I would highly encourage it. This isn't a sponsored post or anything like that. We just have really enjoyed the book. And this year we want to make it a point to share some of these books that have impacted us. We've read so many great ones last year. And as I have shared them with others, I've gotten feedback on how they've been impacted as well. So we want to extend that out in the podcasting community as well. So next month we'll dive into another book that we absolutely loved that is on marriage, and we want to share a bit more about that as well. So for this week, Pay attention to what family, home, and togetherness really looks and feels like for you and for your family. Have some conversations around it. Engage the senses and see how to incorporate more intentional hygge time in your home. And as you've heard, we found it to be just a beautiful, intentional time that's worth making the space for. And remember, it's not about being in perfect alignment with every person in your path. We are all on our own journeys. So the more we can recognize those beautiful perspectives in each other, the experiences and the skills we all have, the more we can celebrate how the uniqueness in each of us strengthens all of us. Namaste.
1, 2, 3. Up with the rising sun, already on the run. Mama says namaste. Life is a tangled mess, and you don't have to stress. Mama says namaste. 'Cause today I will stand up and be all the change that I want to see in this world. Boys and girls, you gotta have to stand up to be free. Namaste in your home. Take a deep breath in and let's start a brand new day. With Mama says namaste.